Hello and welcome to the video lecture on generalization and specialization. So this topic simply deals with how did the designer determine when to create a subtype, supertype entity set. So generalization is what's known as bottom up. In other words, we have multiple entities. We realize that these multiple entities share common attributes, and therefore we create a supertype and leave some attributes in the subtype entities. The other way is that we find ourselves in much more common, I think, is specialization, where I have one entity and then I realize that some of the attributes are being don't apply to all of the instances of the entity, and some other ones do. And we'll just go through the next couple of slides to show you what I'm talking about. So when we get to slide 10, we're looking at the example of generalization. So here again is the bottom up. We've got our three entities. We have car, truck, and motorcycle. Realize that car, truck, and motorcycle all share vehicle ID, price, engine displacement, vehicle name made up of make and model. So when you see that you've got three entities that all share the same attributes, this is when you realize that maybe I should be creating a supertype. And in this case, we are going to make a supertype called vehicle, which has vehicle ID, price, engine displacement, vehicle name, make, and model, because that's what all of those subtypes shared. And then we just look at what distinguished car and truck, and car and truck were distinguished because car had numbers of passengers as an attribute, and truck had capacity and cab type as an attribute. Notice that there is nothing or no subtype for motorcycle because a motorcycle didn't have any distinguishing attributes. We can go back to the previous slide to see that. An example of specialization would be, here I have one entity called part, and I realize that in a lot of the instances of part, either routing number will be blank or supplier will be blank. So if I realize that if I'm looking at parts that are manufactured by me, right, or by my company, all of the parts that I manufacture have routing numbers. Whereas if I go out and I have to buy the part from a vendor, now I'm looking at values or instances of the part entity that have supplier information. So I can see, just looking at the instances of this entity, that these parts either have a routing number or they have a supplier. None of the parts have both routing number and supplier, and there are no parts that don't have a routing number and don't have a supplier. So then we look at the result, and what we have is a specialization where we have a part as the part entity is now the supertype, the manufactured part and the purchased part are subtypes. And then again, we've got purchased parts, which have a relationship to supplies because we're going to have a vendor, or in this case, what's known as a supplier, giving us parts. So the multi-valued attribute, which would be the relationship, initially there was probably a, just going back to associative entities, we probably initially had a many-to-many relationship between purchased part and supplier, and that was broken down into an associative entity called supplies. And that is the end of specialization and generalization.